The fluorescent lights hum above Mercy General's eastern corridor like fluorescent ghosts trapped in plastic shells. Elena Martinez moves through them at precisely 3.2 miles per hour, fast enough to appear busy, slow enough to remain invisible. Her scrubs are hospital-issued navy blue, her badge clipped to the left pocket at a 45-degree angle, her hair pulled back in a regulation bun that took her exactly 90 seconds to complete. Nobody would treat the competent nurse with suspicion. Nobody would ask questions about the woman who kept her eyes down and her voice soft and her hand steady as a surgical laser when she worked. She doesn't know that's about to change. The ER storage room smells like industrial bleach and the copper-edged rust of old metal shelving. Elena counts gauze packets, 4x4 sterile, 2x2 non-sterile, Curlix rolls, saline-soaked cottonoids, as she restocks the cabinet in ascending size order. Her hands move with the economical precision of someone who's placed fours under mortar fire, who's sutured arteries in sandstorms, who's kept people alive when the only light came from muzzle flashes and burning vehicles. A slight tremor runs through her left hand when fatigue sets in, a souvenir from shrapnel that lodged near her ulnar nerve in 2019. She ignores it. Tremors are information. Pain is data. Both can be managed if you've learned to manage yourself. The inventory numbers don't match. She's been at Mercy General for 14 months, and she noticed the discrepancies in pharmaceutical billing by month 3. Saline solution ordered in quantities of 847 units but only 612 units appearing in the delivery logs. Lidocaine vials billed at $34 each but invoiced to something called Cascade Medical Supply Solutions, a company that exists only on paper and in the shell accounts of someone who knows how to hide money in plain sight. The equipment orders are worse. A digital patient monitor system listed at $127,000 when the identical unit costs $28,400 at any legitimate medical supplier. 3 defibrillators. 7 bed frames. A portable ultrasound machine that arrived with serial numbers that don't exist. Elena made a mental note and said nothing. Speaking draws attention. Questions create problems. Problems require explanations that don't hold up under scrutiny. And her explanations are already fragile, a carefully constructed mythology of nursing credentials from Providence Medical Center in Portland, an employment gap explained away as personal leave, no military background listed anywhere because the military no longer acknowledges she exists. Senior Chief Petty Officer Elena Martinez was declared killed in action on March 14, 2019, during a Black Ops extraction in Kandahar Regional Hospital when the Pentagon decided that entire operation needed to vanish. The official records show she died. The classified files show something more complicated. The woman restocking gauze at Mercy General shows nothing at all. She closes the cabinet door and hears the approaching footsteps before she turns. Dr. Marcus Hargrove enters the supply room with the casual entitlement of a man who assumes every space expands to accommodate him. He's 46 years old, 6'3", wearing a white coat that costs more than most nurses' monthly salary, and carrying a tablet that displays a spreadsheet with numbers that make him approximately $847,000 richer every quarter. He glances at her name badge, Elena Martinez, RN, licensed, and dismisses her in the same moment, the way people dismiss competent staff who don't generate conversation or require management attention. The ER director doesn't have time for the quiet ones. The quiet ones don't ask for raises or complain about schedules or make waves. The quiet ones are perfect. Hargrove's presence makes the air pressure change. He carries himself like a man who has never failed at anything, who has network calls to make and emails to send and a hospital to leverage for personal gain. He reviews his tablet while Elena finishes straightening the shelf, muscle memory in motion, hands moving on their own, eyes focused on the work. She's aware of him the way a deer is aware of a sound in the forest. Not fear. Assessment. Data gathering. Her breathing stays controlled, her heart rate stays elevated but manageable, her voice stays quiet when she speaks. The dressing station is fully stocked, Doctor. 8 words. Soft. Deferential. The exact right amount of competence without personality. Hargrove doesn't respond. He scrolls through his tablet, reviewing the pharmaceutical billing sheets, the real ones, not the fabricated documents he sends upward to the board. Lidocaine billed at $34 per vial to Cascade Medical, when he purchased it at $2.17 per vial from a distributor in Charlotte. The margins are extraordinary. The only problem is a nurse who counts supplies with the precision of a federal auditor, who notices when inventory numbers don't reconcile with delivery logs, who has hands that know how to do things that most nurses can't do, and a presence that hints at training that doesn't appear anywhere in her file. Hargrove looks at her properly for the first time. What he sees is a woman of 38, 5'7", no distinguishing features except for the calluses on her hands and the way her posture suggests she's comfortable with weight, both literal and figurative, pressed against her shoulders. Her eyes are grey-green, attentive, and completely unremarkable. Her left hand shows a faint scar across the knuckles, the kind of mark you get from field medicine in places where sterile technique is a luxury. He notices her competence the way you notice a threat you can't quite identify yet. "You've been here 14 months, he says. It's not a question. "Yes, doctor." "Nursing school. University of Portland, RN program, 2008. He nods, filing away the information like a man cataloging potential problems. He knows how to investigate people. He's had to. The board members who've grown comfortable receiving phantom equipment reimbursements don't appreciate surprises, and Elena Martinez feels like the kind of person who could generate surprises. Her hands are too confident. Her knowledge of pharmaceutical inventory is too detailed. Her presence in the ER during critical moments shows a competence that suggests she has training most nurses don't possess. "You work the night shift next week," he says. "I'm scheduled for." "You're scheduled for nights now. I'll have HR update your file." It's not a request. It's a command delivered with the casual authority of a man who has reorganized people's lives before and suffered no consequences. Night shifts isolate staff. Night shifts reduce observation. Night shifts mean fewer witnesses to anything that might need to happen if Elena Martinez decides to ask uncomfortable questions about the inventory discrepancies she's definitely noticed. Elena meets his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. "I'll be here," she says. Something about that phrase, the flatness of it, the absence of complaint or hesitation, makes Hargrove feel like he's made a tactical error somehow. But he can't articulate what. The nurse is compliant. The nurse is deferential. The nurse is exactly what she appears to be. He leaves the supply room and doesn't look back, already running calculations on the profit margin from next quarter's phantom equipment orders. Elena stands alone in the storage room and exhales slowly. Her hands are steady. Her breathing is controlled. The tremor in her left hand has passed because she's given it no attention, no acknowledgement, and it recedes like a tide pulling back from shore. She locks the supply cabinet and moves back into the ER corridor where the fluorescent lights buzz their endless electric song and the monitors beep their rhythmic patterns and the antiseptic smell clings to everything like a second skin. She passes the employee locker room on her way to the trauma bays, and she thinks about the pair of worn combat boots locked in her locker on the bottom shelf, underneath the spare change of scrubs and the cracked mug and the photo of her team leader who died getting her out of Afghanistan. The only physical proof she kept that she was ever anything other than what she pretends to be. The night shift reassignment isn't punishment. It's isolation. But Elena Martinez has survived worse than isolation. She survived sandstorms and mortar fire and decisions made in the dark that required choosing between impossible options. She survived being declared dead when she was still breathing. She survived becoming invisible in a hospital where she moves through corridors with the precision of someone who understands that the quietest person in the room is often the one holding everything together. The ER needs her, whether Dr. Hargrove knows it yet or not. What he didn't understand, what he couldn't understand, was that he'd just made the first mistake. He'd isolated her. He'd put her on a schedule that gave her visibility over every pharmaceutical order, every equipment delivery, every dollar that moved through Mercy General's accounts under cover of legitimacy. And he'd done it believing he was protecting himself. The next week would prove him catastrophically wrong. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that Elena Martinez was no longer invisible. She was being watched. And someone was about to arrive at Mercy General, someone who would recognize exactly what she was, and everything Hargrove believed about his power over this hospital would collapse like a building made of paper. The doors to the ER opened at 7:43 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, and nobody knew that the woman restocking supplies at Station 3 was about to become the most dangerous person in the building. The morning briefing at Mercy General started at 6:19 a.m. on a Wednesday, fluorescent lights humming their mechanical dirge above the conference table. Elena stood with 7 other nurses, her patient assignments printed on a laminated sheet held steady in her hands. Dr. Hargrove hadn't arrived yet, but his absence was a weight everybody felt, the kind of atmospheric pressure that changes before a storm. She was halfway through her summary of post-operative recovery metrics when the door swung open. Hargrove didn't walk in 2 rooms. He announced himself. His tailored blazer, monogrammed cufflinks catching the light, his voice a weapon before his mouth opened. Martinez. He didn't look at her. He looked through her, the way you look through glass. Your summary, maybe speak up a little. Some of us actually finished medical school and need to hear the details instead of whispered mumbling. Elena's hands didn't move. Her voice remained steady, pitched exactly as it had been, the same volume that had guided junior residents through code situations and kept families calm during crisis briefings. Post-op infection rates down 0.3%. 3 patients flagged for early discharge. 2 requires extended observation. Right. Well, that wasn't any clearer. Hargrove pulled out a chair, sat at the head of the table with the deliberate slowness of someone performing dominance. You know what? Let's call you what you are going forward, the rest of the staff will understand the context. You're our charity case, Martinez. Diversity hire the administration forced me to accept. So when you can't articulate basic medical findings, remember where you really came from. A staff nurse named Beth flinched. Another looked at her coffee. Nobody made eye contact with Elena. The fluorescent lights continued their hum, indifferent to the social architecture collapsing in real time. Elena gathered her assignments, placed them in her pocket with the same deliberate precision she'd used preparing surgical equipment. One breath. Then another. Will that be all, Doctor? For now. Hargrove smiled, and it was the smile of someone who'd just discovered he could press a button and watch people flinch. Let's hope you catch on quickly. The briefing continued for 17 more minutes. Elena stood at the back, near the medication dispensing station, present but somehow translucent. This was a skill she'd perfected over 18 years. The ability to absorb punishment and remain unremarkable. It was how she'd survived Kandahar when the mortar rounds came. It was how she'd made the choice to become invisible after extraction. But something had shifted in the economy of her restraint, and she could feel the pressure building behind her sternum, not panic, not fear, but something hotter. Something that recognized the cost of continuous silence. The cafeteria at noon was chaos, the particular controlled chaos of a hospital's main dining facility where nurses grabbed 15 minutes between codes, doctors scrolled through their phones while eating one-handed, and every conversation existed in the background like white noise. Elena carried her tray through the line, coffee black, a turkey sandwich, an apple. Small. Unobtrusive. The kind of meal someone on an invisible budget would select. She was 3 steps past the drink station when the world tilted. Hargrove's shoulder connected with her back, not accidental, not the casual bump of crowded spaces. This was deliberate. Calculated. Her tray arced upward, the coffee cup tumbling end over end, the sandwich spinning, the apple rolling across the tile floor like a rubber ball. Everything clattered and scattered. The sound cut through the cafeteria noise like a gunshot. Everyone looked. Everyone saw. Oh, there she goes, Hargrove said loudly, his voice pitched for maximum audience. Pick that up, sweetheart. Assuming you can read the cleanup instructions. Maybe we wrote them in big letters for you. 2 attending physicians turned their chairs to watch. A group of residents froze mid-conversation. The cafeteria workers paused from their stations. Elena knelt down, and the world narrowed to the specific tiles in front of her, the spilled coffee still steaming, the the sandwich sitting soggy on the floor. She breathed. One measured breath, drawing air all the way down to her abdomen where the old scars lived, where muscle memory kept time with different sounds, the percussion of mortar fire, the rhythm of field surgery, the cadence of keeping people alive when the infrastructure of civilization had crumbled. A single tear escaped. Just one. She felt it track down her cheek and she didn't wipe it away immediately. Instead, she collected each piece of debris methodically. The paper cup. The sandwich. The apple. Another nurse, Beth from the morning briefing, moved as if to help, but Elena's eyes caught hers with a look that said, "Don't." This had to be handled alone. She rose. She met Hargrove's eyes directly, and in that moment something shifted in her posture. Nothing dramatic. No visible transformation. Just a straightening of the spine, a deepening of the gaze, the kind of stillness that comes from having already survived the worst the world had to offer. She reached up and wiped the tear with the back of her hand. Her voice, when it came, was quiet enough that only Hargrove and the closest observers heard it. "I've sutured arteries in sandstorms, doctor. Your insecurity doesn't even register as turbulence." The silence was absolute. Not the ambient quiet of a busy place, actual silence. The kind where fluorescent light seemed louder, where fabric moving against skin sounded like canvas shifting, where a single breath became audible. Hargrove's face cycled through surprise into something darker. He forced a laugh. It landed hard and hollow. "Very funny, Martinez. Get yourself cleaned up." But his hands were clenched around his plate, and Elena watched the calculation happening behind his eyes. This woman had just publicly challenged him. In front of witnesses. In front of people he needed to believe in his absolute authority. That response, calm, precise, devastatingly self-possessed, was not the reaction of someone who could be broken by public humiliation. It was the response of someone who'd already been broken and rebuilt in conditions that made cafeteria theater look like children's games. Elena disposed of the ruined tray, grabbed a new cup of coffee at the station, and walked out of the cafeteria without rushing. No one stopped her. No one even tried. Hargrove sat alone at his table, abandoned by the physicians who'd been watching, his power suddenly seeming less absolute. 3 days later, Elena was documenting patient charts at the nurse's station when Hargrove appeared, his suit somehow more expensive than the last time she'd looked directly at him, teal Hermes tie, shoes that cost more than her monthly rent. He carried her charts in one hand, slapping them down on the counter with percussion that made 3 nearby nurses jump. "Your documentation is sloppy, charity case. Pick them up and redo them. Properly this time." Paper scattered across the tile floor. Elena's hand stilled for exactly 1 second. Then she began collecting them, each page deliberate, each movement controlled. Beth approached. "Why do you let him treat you like that?" Beth's voice was urgent, sympathetic, the kind of kindness that came from genuine confusion. Elena's answer emerged in barely a whisper, "Because I can't afford to be noticed." But even as she said it, she knew it was no longer entirely true. She was noticed. Not as Elena Martinez, the nursing contractor with the sparse resume and the careful anonymity. She was noticed as a threat, a woman whose competence couldn't be reconciled with her supposed background, whose responses to degradation had the precision of someone trained in psychological operations, whose hands moved in the operating room like they'd done this before, under circumstances the hospital's sterile bay could never produce. In his office that afternoon, Hargrove made a calculation. Elena had become unpredictable. She had also become dangerous to his pharmaceutical schemes. He'd seen her in the supply room twice, noted her interest in inventory discrepancies, watched her looking at his billing orders with the kind of attention that suggested she understood what she was seeing. The cafeteria incident had shown her to be someone whose authority he couldn't erode through conventional humiliation. Which meant he would need to deploy something more sophisticated. He pulled out his phone. Started making calls to people who owed him favors. Board members enriched through his phantom equipment contracts. 3 people in administration who benefited from his schemes. By evening, he'd activated a network built on complicity and mutual financial interest. Elena didn't know any of this yet. She finished her shift at 10:02 p.m., showered in the nurse's locker room, and changed back into civilian clothes, jeans, a grey hoodie, the kind of attire that made her disappear into any crowd. She had no way of knowing that tomorrow a complaint would be filed, that her credentials would be questioned, that the machinery of institutional power was already moving against her with the kind of coordinated precision that only money and leverage could produce. What she did know was that Hargrove had stopped mocking her publicly. He'd moved to something else. Something colder. And in that shift from social humiliation to strategic escalation, Elena understood exactly what kind of enemy she'd made, not a bully, but a man competent enough to see her as a genuine threat to his criminal enterprise, intelligent enough to realize he couldn't eliminate her through conventional means, and willing to use every institutional tool at his disposal to remove her before she realized what she'd stumbled onto. The rain started at 11:23 p.m. as Elena walked to the bus stop, hammering the parking lot like applause for something no one had witnessed. She pulled her hood up and waited in the darkness, her combat boots solid on wet asphalt, and somewhere in the fluorescent-lit corridors behind her, Hargrove was already dismantling the career of someone whose past he had no comprehension of whatsoever. The emergency department doors hissed open at 2:41 a.m., and a man in his 60s stumbled through them, clutching his chest. Colonel James Rieher, United States Air Force, visiting his daughter for the weekend, was moving slower than he should have been moving. His daughter, Captain Sarah Rieher, followed 3 steps behind, her voice sharp with military precision. He complained of chest tightness at dinner. Shortness of breath started 20 minutes ago. Elena was restocking the crash cart in Bay 3 when the overhead alert crackled. Patient presentation, possible cardiac event, waiting room. She didn't hesitate. She moved toward the front desk where the triage nurse was already waving Colonel Rieher toward a chair, but Elena recognized something in the way he sat, the rigid posture of someone whose body was collapsing inward, not forward. His neck veins were distended. His skin had taken on the gray-white tone of someone whose heart wasn't pumping blood efficiently anywhere. She approached him directly. "Sir, I'm Elena. Can you tell me what you're feeling right now?" Colonel Rieher's voice was thin, barely there. "Pressure. Like someone sitting on my chest. And I can't," he paused, breathing shallow. "I can't quite catch a full breath." Elena's eyes moved to the cardiac monitor the triage nurse was already attaching. His oxygen saturation was 89%. His heart rate was 118, climbing. His blood pressure read 96/62 and dropping. She'd seen this before. She'd seen it in tents outside Kandahar Regional Hospital in 2019, in the middle of the night, with mortar fire bracketing the compound and exactly 3 minutes to decide whether someone lived or died. Cardiac tamponade. The pericardium, the membrane surrounding the heart, was filling with blood. Every milliliter of fluid compressed the ventricles a little tighter. Every beat of his heart was less efficient than the last. Within minutes, it would become circular arrest. Within an hour, it would be irreversible. Elena's voice didn't change pitch. "I need a stretcher in Bay 1. Crash cart. Ultrasound machine. Move now." The efficiency in her tone, not a request, not a suggestion, got immediate response. 2 nurses moved simultaneously. The triage coordinator was already calling it out to the charge nurse. Colonel Rieher was being guided onto a stretcher, and Elena was walking beside him, her hand steady on his shoulder. That's when Dr. Hargrove arrived. He moved through the double doors with his usual stride, looking at a tablet, not at the patient. His eyes came up when he heard Elena, Bay 1. Colonel Rieher, 63, presenting with chest pressure, shortness of breath, distended neck veins, BP dropping, sat 89 and falling. "I'm suspecting cardiac tamponade. He needs an echo and pericardiocentesis. We can't wait." Hargrove glanced at the monitor as they wheeled past. His expression didn't change. "Get him to Bay 1. Let's get a full workup before we make any diagnosis." They moved into the trauma bay, and Elena was already prepping, already explaining to the colonel, "We're going to do an ultrasound of your heart. I need you to stay as still as you can. Can you do that for me? Colonel Raleigh nodded, his jaw tight. Captain Sarah positioned herself at the head of the stretcher, and the resemblance between them was suddenly obvious, the same determined jawline, the same steady eyes, even in crisis. The ultrasound machine hummed to life. Elena applied the gel with practiced efficiency, moving the transducer across Colonel Raleigh's chest in the parasternal long-axis view. The image resolved on the screen, and there it was, the pericardial effusion, black and fluid-filled, surrounding the compressed right ventricle like a vice. She measured it, 3.4 centimeters. Significant. Dangerous. Doctor, look at this. Elena gestured to Hargrove, who was standing in the doorway reviewing other charts. He didn't move immediately. When he did approach the ultrasound screen, his face remained unreadable. He studied the image for perhaps 10 seconds. Then he stepped back, crossed his arms, and said very quietly, "We wait for Dr. Chen." Elena's hand stilled on the transducer. "So, Dr. Chen. Cardiothoracic surgery. He's in the building. We have a specialist available. We wait for him." Hargrove's voice carried the weight of a man who had already decided, and his eyes, cold, calculating, moved briefly to meet Elena's before returning to the monitor. "This is a liability situation. We perform any invasive procedure without proper specialty consultation, and we're exposing Mercy General to significant risk. Dr. Chen is 40 minutes out from the OR. We stabilize and wait." Elena kept her voice level. "His BP is dropping. He's got maybe 30 minutes before his heart stops compensating. 40 minutes is too long." "Then you're not hearing me, Martinez." Hargrove stepped closer, his voice dropping to something that wasn't quite a whisper but close enough to make it personal. "This patient waits for the appropriate specialist. Those are my orders. Communicate that to the team." He turned and left the bay. Elena looked at the monitor. Colonel Raleigh's BP had dropped to 88/58. His heart rate was now 126. The jugular veins in his neck stood out like cords. His skin was getting darker, the grey-white shifting toward blue-grey. "How long?" Captain Sarah's voice was clipped, military. 20 minutes. Maybe 30 if we're lucky and his body compensates well." Elena met her eyes. "Your father needs a needle in his pericardium to drain the fluid now. Not in 40 minutes. Now. Then do it." Elena nodded once and moved toward the supply cart. That's when Hargrove reappeared in the doorway, blocking the entrance completely. His face had shifted into something harder, something with teeth. "If you perform any procedure on this patient without my explicit authorization, you will be terminated before his blood pressure stabilizes. Do you understand me? I will personally ensure you never work in any healthcare facility in this state again. You will be reported to every licensing board, every hospital administrator, every." "Understood, doctor." Elena's voice cut through his like a scalpel through tissue. She didn't raise it. She didn't need to. "I heard you the first time." She moved toward him, and Hargrove didn't step aside. He stood in the doorway like a man who believed his position, his authority, his title, his institutional power, was enough to hold back biology. Elena stopped directly in front of him. Close enough that he could see the absolute absence of doubt in her eyes. "Step back," she said quietly. "I said no procedure. I'm very clear about. Step back, doctor." Something in the way she said it, not angry, not desperate, but with the kind of absolute certainty that comes from having already made an irreversible decision, made Hargrove's face redden. He didn't move though. He stood there in the doorway, blocking her access to the supply cart, his jaw clenched. Elena moved around him instead. Not past him. Around him. Like water flowing around a stone. She collected the 18-gauge needle, the ultrasound probe cover, the sterile drape, the extension tubing. Her hands were completely steady. The trembling that might have appeared in another person, some register of fear or anger or the weight of defying a direct order, that wasn't in her. She'd followed worse orders from better people in circumstances where the cost of failure wasn't a career, it was lives. "You're done, Martinez." Hargrove's voice was tight now, furious. "You understand that? You're finished." Elena didn't respond. She moved back to the bedside, where Colonel Raleigh was watching her with the kind of clarity that comes from being a soldier facing a crisis. Captain Sarah had one hand on her father's shoulder. Both of them understood that something significant was happening. Both of them were military. Both of them recognized when someone had crossed a line they couldn't uncross. Elena prepped the ultrasound probe, found the optimal position, fifth intercostal space, just medial to the mid-axillary line, where the pericardial fluid was most accessible. She marked the spot with her fingertip. The ultrasound confirmed the depth, approximately 4.2 centimeters from the skin surface. "Colonel, I'm going to give you a small amount of local anesthetic first. You're going to feel a pinch, then some pressure. After that, you should feel relief when the fluid drains." "Do it," Colonel Raleigh said. Elena's hands moved through the preparation with the precision of someone who'd done this exact procedure in field hospitals and trauma tents, with incoming fire and inadequate light and patients who didn't have the luxury of waiting 40 minutes for a specialist. She'd done this with a headlamp duct taped to her forehead. She'd done this with blood and sand mixing on the gloves of the only person in a 300-mile radius trained to do it. This was clean. This was well lit. This was controlled. The needle slid in. Elena's eyes never left the ultrasound screen. She advanced slowly, watching the tip of the needle approach the fluid collection. 1 millimeter at a time. The kind of precision that only comes from having lived through the cost of being imprecise. The needle punctured the pericardium. Immediately, dark red fluid began flowing back through the needle into the collection syringe. Elena could hear Hargrove's breathing change behind her, sharp now, angry, but she kept working. The fluid drained steadily. She watched the pressure ease off Colonel Raleigh's heart on the ultrasound. Watched the compressed right ventricle begin to re-expand. Watched his oxygen saturation tick upward, 89 to 91 to 93. On the monitor, his heart rate began to normalize. His blood pressure started to climb. 290 ccs, Elena said quietly, noting the volume. "He's stabilizing. Someone get me a second full line and let's start normal saline. Hang 2 units of O negative. We need to figure out where the bleeding's coming from, but this pressure's off now. His heart can work again." She didn't look at Hargrove. She didn't acknowledge his presence or his order or the threat he'd made. She simply continued working, adjusting the flow rate, monitoring the vital signs, making minute adjustments like a pilot flying by instruments through absolute darkness. The emergency department around her had gone very quiet. 3 other physicians who worked at Mercy General had arrived during the crisis, Dr. Patterson from internal medicine, Dr. Valdez from the overnight shift, and a resident whose name Elena still wasn't sure of. All 3 of them were watching her work with expressions she couldn't quite read. Part shock. Part recognition. Part something else. That's when the waiting room doors opened again, and a man in a green surgical cap walked through, already pulling off gloves. Trauma page said we had a possible cardiac emergency. Dr. Chen, the cardiothoracic surgeon who was supposed to be 40 minutes away, had apparently just finished a procedure and come straight down. He moved to the bedside and took in the scene in seconds, the stabilized patient, the pericardiocentesis needle still in place, the ultrasound showing a dramatically improved cardiac silhouette, the vital signs climbing back toward normal. "Dr. Chen," Elena said, "Colonel Raleigh presented with cardiac tamponade secondary to pericardial effusion. I performed emergency pericardiocentesis approximately 4 minutes ago. Initial drainage approximately 290 ccs. He's stabilizing well, but he needs to go to imaging to determine the source of the bleeding. Possible hemopericardium from aortic dissection, but vital signs are holding and improving." Dr. Chen looked from the ultrasound image to the patient to Elena, and something shifted in his expression. It was recognition, but not the kind that comes from having seen someone before. It was the kind that comes from watching someone work. "Good call, he said simply. You probably saved his life. Hargrove had disappeared from the doorway sometime during the procedure. Elena didn't notice exactly when. The next 6 hours were a controlled blur of precision work. Colonel Raleigh needed to stay monitored, needed repeat ultrasounds to ensure the pericardial fluid wasn't reaccumulating, needed cardiac enzymes and EKGs and a CT angiogram to rule out aortic dissection. Elena worked every minute of those 6 hours, staying close to his bed, checking the ultrasound every 30 minutes, adjusting medications, watching for any sign that the pressure was returning. Captain Sarah never left. She sat at her father's bedside, and at hour 3, she said quietly, "You knew exactly what you were doing." Elena didn't answer immediately. She was adjusting me for infusion rate, her eyes on the monitor. He needed it. I know he did. That's not what I meant. Captain Sarah's voice had shifted into something harder, more certain. I've seen a lot of trauma medicine. I've seen good doctors work. I've seen excellent doctors work. I've seen exactly once before, in a field hospital outside Kandahar in 2019, someone move like you just moved. Someone with that precision under pressure. I didn't think I'd see it again. Elena's hand stilled for just a moment on the fall line. She didn't turn around. That was Corporal Danny Reeves standing outside Bay 1, Captain Sarah continued. He came in maybe an hour after you started the drip. Complained of a deep laceration on his leg from a training accident. Says he was coming to see his brother who's a resident here. So you working on my father? Nearly dropped his stretcher when he realized who you were. The emergency department doors hissed open and a young man in his late 20s was brought in on a stretcher by 2 paramedics. Corporal Danny Reeves, read the intake sheet. Male, 28, right leg laceration with reported arterial involvement from training accident. The kind of injury that would have sent most emergency physicians straight to orthopedic surgery or vascular. The kind of injury that, handled imprecisely, would cost him the use of the leg. Elena was with Colonel Raleigh when they wheeled Corporal Reeves past. She was checking the ultrasound, looking for any sign of fluid reaccumulation, when the corporal's voice came from the stretcher behind her. Hey, nurse? Can I? He paused, and Elena turned slightly, ready to respond to a question about pain or medications or anything the injured soldier might need. The stretcher stopped moving. Corporal Reeves was staring at her with an expression that moved from confusion to shock to something that looked like recognition, then disbelief, then absolute certainty. He tried to sit up, and the paramedics gently pushed him back down, but his eyes never left hers. Kandahar Regional Hospital. 2019. His voice was very quiet, and it carried the weight of someone speaking across 6 years and thousands of miles to a person he'd thought he'd never see again. You're the phantom surgeon. The one who saved my entire squad. The emergency department had gone quiet again. Elena could feel the attention of every person within earshot turning toward her. The paramedics. The nursing staff. Captain Sarah, who had shifted her attention from her father to Elena's face. Elena didn't move. She didn't change her expression. She simply stood there in her scrubs with her steady hands and her calm eyes, and for the first time since she'd arrived at Mercy General, something about her identity, her real identity, was no longer invisible. The waiting room erupted into chaos the moment Colonel James Raleigh collapsed. 1 second he was sitting in a plastic chair with his hands pressed against his chest, the next his body convulsed and his mouth opened like a fish drowning in air. His daughter Sarah, still in her Air Force dress uniform from her emergency flight to Raleigh, caught him as he fell sideways. Someone get help. Now. Her voice carried command authority. Elena heard the commotion from the med station and moved toward the waiting room before the overhead speaker crackled. She didn't run, never ran, that was panic, but her stride covered ground with military efficiency. 23 feet from the nursing desk to the doorway. 1 breath. 2. The colonel lay on the linoleum floor, his face a mask of compressed agony, his breathing shallow and desperate. His lips had taken on a bluish cast. Sarah knelt beside him, one hand supporting his head, the other reaching for someone, anyone. I need a monitor. Now. Elena was already kneeling, her fingers finding the pulse point on his neck. Thready. Racing. What happened? Chest pain. Sudden. Like something ripped open inside. Sarah's voice stayed level, military-trained, but her eyes betrayed the terror. He said he couldn't breathe. Elena's hands moved across his chest, palpating, reading the body like a map. The skin cool despite the waiting room heat. Distended neck veins. The telltale silence when she placed her stethoscope, breath sounds absent on the left side. She didn't need to hear the diagnosis, her hands already knew it. Cardiac tamponade. His pericardium, the membrane around his heart, was filling with blood. Every second, more fluid compressed the chamber. Every second, the pump weakened. In minutes, his heart would stop. Dr. Hargrove arrived in the doorway, followed by Dr. Chen, the on-call cardiologist, and 3 residents clustering like birds sensing a storm. Elena stood, her voice cutting through the gathering confusion. 48-year-old male. Acute chest pain. Distended JVD, muffled heart sounds, no breath sounds left side. Tamponade. Dr. Chen's eyes widened. He reached for the portable echo machine, the ultrasound that would confirm what Elena's hands had already diagnosed. But before he could move toward the patient, Dr. Hargrove stepped forward, his voice dropping into the authoritative register he used during rounds. We wait for cardiothoracic. This requires surgical intervention in a controlled environment. His jaw tightened as he looked at the monitors being wheeled over. We're not equipped for emergency drainage here. Cardiothoracic is 40 minutes out, Elena said quietly. She wasn't arguing. Merely stating data. He has minutes. Protocol requires a living patient. Elena's eyes held Hargrove's. They didn't challenge. They simply didn't blink. Dr. Chen stepped closer to the echo machine, trying to work around the tension. But another resident, Dr. Morrison, shook his head. If we attempt intervention and something goes wrong, the liability exposure is. He dies either way, Sarah's voice cut through like a laser. Either you treat him or you let me watch my father suffocate on his own blood. Choose. The room went so quiet you could hear the fluorescent lights hum. Elena didn't move. She was waiting for permission she knew wouldn't come. But her hands were steady, her breathing unchanged, her presence like a stone in rushing water, unmovable. She'd stood in worse places. A field hospital in Kandahar with mortar fire shaking the canvas walls. A convoy ambush at Sanjin where the wounded came faster than supplies. This room, this moment, was nothing compared to what her hands had already held together. Hargrove's face darkened. He turned to Chen. Set up a transfer to Duke. Get them a helicopter if necessary. We wait for specialists. He won't survive the transfer, Elena said. Still quiet. Still not arguing. PA rhythm in 5 minutes. Cardiac arrest before the helicopter lands. Then that's on you for trying something outside your scope. Hargrove's voice was ice. You're a nurse. You follow orders from physicians. Elena looked at Sarah. Then back to the colonel's blue-tinged lips, the chest heaving like a bellows with a leak. She looked at Dr. Chen, who couldn't meet her eyes. At the residents clustered at the doorway, paralyzed by institutional fear and liability insurance policies. She'd made a decision that would destroy her career in exactly 72 hours. Dr. Chen, I need you to confirm tamponade via echo. I need an 18-gauge needle, a 3-way stopcock, and a collection basin. Elena was already moving, her voice taking on a different frequency, lower, more precise, carrying the kind of authority that came from having made decisions that saved lives. I'm performing pericardiocentesis. Absolutely not, Hargrove said. Seconded, another resident murmured. But Elena was already scrubbing her hands in the waiting room sink, her movements economical, practiced, guided by muscle memory that reached back 4,000 miles and 6 years. The rotor wash of helicopter blades. The hiss of full lines. The smell of antiseptic mixed with copper blood. Pain is data. Trembling hands are useless. Focus is survival. Dr. Chen's face contorted between protocol and human decency. He finally nodded once. I'll confirm the tamponade on echo. The echo took 90 seconds. Blood compressing the right atrium. Fluid filling the pericardial space like a killer with no hands. Confirmation that Elena was correct and every physician in the room was standing on the wrong side of the line between caution and cowardice. Elena draped the field with sterile towels, her fingers finding the angle between the 5th and 6th ribs, the subxiphoid approach, the landmark that didn't require a surgical theater or a full surgical team. Just hands that had done this before while round exploded in the distance. The needle went in with a soft resistance, then the give of crossing into the pericardial sac. A syringe. A gentle pull. And suddenly, blood. Dark blood that didn't belong anywhere except inside vessels, flowing into the collection basin while the monitor began to cry its electronic prayer. O2 sat climbing. 84. 87. 90. The colonel's breathing eased. The desperation left his face. Elena didn't look at Hargrove watching from the doorway. Didn't look at the resident stepping backward as if distance could absolve them. She was somewhere else, a place where the only sound was the monitor and the only focus was keeping a heart beating. She stayed at that bedside for 6 hours straight. Dr. Brennan brought water at one point. Elena drank it without looking away from the patient. Beth reassigned her other patients without being asked. Elena simply nodded. The colonel stabilized enough to be transferred to the cardiac care unit, and still Elena didn't leave, watching the monitor, adjusting the drainage, her hands never trembling, her focus absolute. This was the work. Not the paperwork, not the politics, not the hierarchies that determined who got to decide who lived. When Dr. Chen finally returned at hour 6, he reviewed her work in silence. His eyes moved across the sterile field, the placement of the needle, the drainage volume, the vital signs now stable and climbing back toward normal. Whoever trained you, he said quietly, saved this man's life. That was textbook battlefield medicine. Elena simply nodded. Colonel Raiha regained consciousness as the sun moved lower behind the hospital windows, painting everything in that amber light that makes ordinary rooms look like they're burning from the inside. His eyes focused on Elena, and his hand reached out. She took it, her hand steady, his trembling with the aftershock of nearly dying. "Thank you, nurse," he said. "Just doing my job, sir," Elena replied. But 2 hours later, Hargrove's office felt like a tomb with fluorescent lighting. He didn't stand when she entered. The termination papers were already on the desk, edges aligned with the desk corners, every document perfectly in place. His office smelled like leather and expensive coffee and something else, the particular scent of a man watching his authority question itself. Your insubordination today endangered a patient and violated direct orders. His voice had lost its edge. That made it worse. This wasn't anger. This was architecture. I've contacted your previous employers. There are significant inconsistencies in your employment history. Gaps. Redacted information. No one seems to have actual records of your work before Mercy General. Elena said nothing. I've also requested the board bring in an ethics consultant to review your conduct. He slid the papers forward. You're terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you out. Don't make this complicated. Elena signed the papers in silence. Her signature looked like someone else's, careful, controlled, professional. The signature of a person with something to lose. The signature of a woman who'd already lost everything that mattered twice. At midnight, she stood at a rain-soaked bus stop on the edge of Raleigh with a cardboard box that held a cracked coffee mug, a dying succulent in a ceramic pot, and a photograph of her team leader. His name had been Captain Marcus Webb. He died getting her out of Afghanistan. The rain came down like bullets, and Elena didn't move. She'd stood in worse. But she'd never felt more alone. Erased from the military database. Erased from Mercy General. erased from every hospital that would ever hire her after Hargrove made the necessary calls. Twice invisible. Twice dead. A bus rounded the corner, its headlights cutting through the rain, and she could see the destination on the digital display. Nowhere that mattered. The bus pulled away without her. Elena watched the red taillights blur through rain-soaked windows as she stood motionless at the stop, cardboard box pressed against her chest like a shield. Inside, a cracked mug from some forgotten break room, a succulent withering in its pot, and a photograph of Lieutenant Commander James Park, the man who died extracting her from Kandahar when the mission went sideways and the Pentagon needed the whole operation erased from existence. She was nobody's hero. She was nobody's anything. Just another ghost pushing a broom through a hospital that no longer wanted her. 2 days. 48 hours of sitting in a studio apartment with no lease, no forwarding address, no reason to answer the door. She'd taken the night shift at a 24-hour diner on Fayetteville Street, washing dishes behind a line cook who never asked questions. The pay was cash. The invisibility was complete. This was the life, the real life, of someone declared KIA with nowhere to go and no one allowed to know she'd survived. But that wasn't the worst part. The rotor wash hit the Mercy General parking lot like a sonic shockwave at 2:06 p.m. on a Wednesday. Elena was 3 miles away, elbow-deep in industrial soapy water, when her phone, the burner phone, the one nobody had, buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Turn on channel 8. Now. She didn't recognize the sender. She almost deleted it. Then something older than caution, something trained into her bone marrow, made her move to the break room television where a staff nurse was already staring at the screen with her hand over her mouth. 3 UH-60M Blackhawks descended through the Raleigh sky in perfect tactical formation, their rotor blades beating the air like the sound of something inevitable. The news anchor's voice was breathless. 3 military helicopters have just landed at Mercy General Hospital in what appears to be an unscheduled emergency landing. We're receiving reports of federal agents on scene. Elena's hands went steady. Her breathing didn't change. The dish water dripped from her wrists onto the linoleum floor in a rhythm she could count. Someone's coming for something, she said to the television. She wasn't thinking about the hospital. She wasn't thinking about Hargrove. She was thinking about the boots. 37 minutes later, in a boardroom on the 7th floor of Mercy General where Elena had never been allowed to step, a Navy SEAL commander in dress blue stood at the head of the table with his hands flat against the polished mahogany and his voice steady as a ballistic pendulum. I'm looking for Senior Chief Petty Officer Elena Martinez. Call sign, Valkyrie 7. Is she in this building? The room went dead silent. Board members exchanged glances. Dr. Hargrove, seated near the window, had gone the color of drywall. The commander continued, his eyes tracking across every face. She performed an emergency pericardiocentesis on Colonel James Raleigh 72 hours ago. He survived because of her intervention. I need to understand why that officer is no longer on your roster. Board Chair Patricia Hollis spoke first. Colonel Raleigh recovered fully from his cardiac event. The treatment was successful, but she was fired. The commander's voice dropped. It wasn't a question. The door opened. Captain Sarah Raleigh, the colonel's daughter, also Air Force, also a trauma surgeon herself, stepped into the boardroom in uniform. Behind her came an elderly staff nurse named Beth Martinez, who'd worked at Mercy General for 23 years and had access to the filing systems. Captain Raih's voice was steady but carried the weight of someone who'd watched her father flatline and been told to stand down. My father would be dead without Senior Chief Petty Officer Martinez. She didn't hesitate. She didn't ask permission. She saved his life while every other physician in this hospital refused to act. Beth placed a folder on the table, an unredacted file, the kind that required federal access to retrieve. Her hands trembled as she read aloud, Senior Chief Petty Officer Elena Martinez. 3 Navy Crosses. 2 Purple Hearts. 247 combat saves across for classified deployments. Commendation for Excellence Under Fire, Kandahar Regional Hospital, 2017 through 2019. The SEAL commander stepped closer to the board chair. You're telling me you terminated a decorated combat surgeon because she didn't have the proper credentials in her cover file? Is that correct? He didn't wait for an answer. Senior Chief Martinez was declared KIA in 2019 following a classified extraction operation in Kandahar province. She was protecting 17 Allied operatives from Taliban siege fire when the order came through to get out. She made sure every one of them made it. Then she went dark, officially dead, unofficially alive, because the Pentagon needed that operation to vanish. He paused. The fluorescent lights hummed their electric song above the mahogany table. The woman you just fired was one of the most decorated operators in JSOC history. And you fired her because you were afraid she'd notice your billing discrepancies, Dr. Hargrove. Hargrove's face went from white to red like a thermometer plunged into boiling water. Those allegations are completely, I maintained standards, I upheld protocols. The IT director, a Marine Corps veteran named Marcus Webb, stood from the back of the room holding a hard drive and a laptop. His movements were precise, military, someone who'd worked in secure communications before taking a civilian job. Dr. Hargrove attempted to delete security footage from the past 6 months. I backed up every frame before he could scrub the system. He opened the laptop. The screen showed grainy but unmistakable footage, Hargrove's face, mid-snarl, as he swept Elena's lunch tray across the cafeteria floor. Then the chart scattered at her feet like snow. The image froze on her face, completely calm, one tear escaping, composure intact as though the doctor's rage was whether she'd already survived. Marcus continued, but that's not the damaging part. He clicked to new footage. The timestamp read 11:34 p.m. on the day of Elena's termination. Hargrove stood alone in the pharmaceutical storage room, photographing inventory logs with his personal cell phone. His voice came through the audio, speaking to someone on a call. I don't care what you have to fabricate. I need her gone before she notices the discrepancies. Get me 3 ethics violations by morning. Captain Reiher spoke again, her voice like a knife edge. I have phone records from 6 hours after Senior Chief Martinez was terminated. Dr. Hargrove made for calls to board members he'd previously enriched through your pharmaceutical billing schemes. He offered them a fabricated narrative about Senior Chief Martinez's employment history, her false credentials, her supposed insubordination. He called in favors. He manufactured an ethics complaint through an outside consultant, a consultant who was paid directly from a shell company we've now connected to Dr. Hargrove's healthcare fraud network. The room's temperature seemed to drop. Board member Gerald Sinclair, whose consulting firm had received $847,000 from that shell company over 18 months, pushed his chair back from the table. Legal counsel whispered into a phone. Marcus Webb clicked through more footage, 6 months of Hargrove in the supply room, altering inventory logs, photographing pharmaceutical counts that didn't match his billing records. The math was visible in the timestamps and image files. Federal investigators received my report 90 minutes ago, Marcus said. His voice carried the calm precision of someone who'd done what needed doing. They're reviewing his billing records as we speak. Preliminary estimate, $3.7 million in fraudulent pharmaceutical charges, equipment overages, and phantom medical procedures billed to insurance carriers across 18 months. 2 FBI agents entered the boardroom. They didn't knock. Hargrove stood abruptly, his chair scraping backward with a sound like nails on tile. This is absurd. Those charges are routine administrative, my documentation is. The SEAL commander moved to block the doorway with his body. 6'3", shoulders that moved like someone had constructed them from reinforced steel. You prevented a combat-decorated senior chief petty officer from continuing to save lives because you were afraid she'd discover your theft. You manufactured a termination to silence her? You don't get routine administrative explanations, Doctor. He paused. The silence held itself perfectly still. You get federal prosecution. You get the end of your career. FBI Special Agent Carla Santos approached Hargrove with handcuffs that clicked like a door closing on his entire world. She read him his rights in a monotone that had probably ended 100 careers before his. Hargrove's network crumbled like wet tissue paper. Board members who'd benefited from his schemes suddenly needed to consult their attorneys. Dr. Marcus Brennan, the chief resident who'd been pressured into documenting false performance issues about Elena, began writing statements for the investigation. The hospital's legal department requested a comprehensive review of every case Hargrove had touched in the past 5 years. And then the boardroom doors opened. Elena stood in the doorway wearing navy dress blues for the first time in 3 years. The uniform she was supposed to be dead in. The uniform that had been locked away in a storage unit along with every piece of her real identity. She held a pair of worn combat boots in her hands, boots caked with red Kandahar dust that no amount of cleaning would remove, boots she'd worn the night she'd extracted those 17 operatives while gunfire painted the sky orange. The boots that kept her tethered to who she actually was. The entire hospital staff, security officers, nurses, doctors, administrative assistants, rose in absolute silence. It wasn't applause. It wasn't cheering. It was the kind of quiet that comes when you finally understand you've been standing next to a legend. The SEAL commander saluted her with his fist crossed over his heart. She returned it with precision. Colonel Rieher rolled into the boardroom by his daughter, gripped Elena's hand with both of his. "You saved my life twice, Senior Chief. Once on that table, and once by showing my daughter what actual courage looks like." His eyes were wet. He didn't apologize for it. Board Chair Holler stepped forward with a formal statement of reinstatement, back pay totaling $94,000, and an apology that would be documented and filed. Elena listened without expression. Her voice, when it came, carried the timbre of someone who'd given orders to people holding weapons. "I'll consider your offer. But first, I want to know what happens to Dr. Hargrove." Agent Santos provided the answer: federal prosecution for healthcare fraud and conspiracy, permanent revocation of medical licensure, criminal restitution to the insurance carriers he'd defrauded, minimum sentence of 8 years in federal custody. Hargrove was led past Elena as he was escorted from the boardroom, his face a mask of disbelief and rage, his entire constructed authority collapsing in the space of 90 minutes. He didn't look at her. He couldn't. She was everything his world was built to deny: competent, honored, unbreakable. Elena stood motionless, holding those boots in both hands like they were the only true thing in a hospital built on lies. 6 months later, Dr. Hargrove could be found at a community college on the outskirts of Raleigh, teaching CPR to teenagers and insurance adjusters for $16.50 per hour, correcting their hand placement on plastic mannequins while they ignored him. His authority had been reduced to the precise compression depth required to revive a dummy. The irony was exquisite and complete. Elena accepted the position of trauma coordinator at Mercy General with a new mandate: build a veteran-focused emergency medicine program and establish protocols for trauma treatment that didn't require a physician's permission to begin. She kept those combat boots in her office now, visible on a shelf beside her commendations. No longer hidden. No longer apologizing. No longer invisible. One afternoon, Beth asked her how she'd managed to stay so composed through Hargrove's escalating abuse. Elena was training a new class of nurses on the battlefield-efficient suturing technique she'd perfected under mortar fire. Her hands moved with the certainty of someone who'd sutured arteries in sandstorms. "True class is what you do when the lights go out," she said without looking up from the practice model. In Kandahar, the lights went out every night. We still saved lives. Hargrove was just another bully in a well-lit room. She tied off a final knot. The suture line was perfect. And bullies like that, they only have power when you let them define you. Once you stop asking permission to exist, they become irrelevant. The nurses watching her understood. They were learning from someone who'd already survived the worst and still chose to teach instead of hide. If you've made it this far, you know what it means to be underestimated and proven undeniably right. Share this story, subscribe to our channel, leave a comment about a time someone underestimated you, and hit that notification bell so you never miss another story about the quiet warriors walking among us, the ones the world almost broke but couldn't quite kill. Because sometimes the bravest people wear scrubs instead of medals, and the real heroes are the ones who save you when nobody's watching.